Hello, Red Cape Revolution. I am so happy today to be here with my friend, Gena Cox. She is the author of a great new book. You can see I've already flagged pages in it that we're going to get a chance to talk with her. It's called Leading Inclusion. The subtitle is Drive Change Your Employees Can See and Feel. And we've talked so much in our world, right, about inclusion and different issues tied to diversity and equity and everything. Gena's the expert here. She's here to tell us more about the book and more importantly about things that we can do in our workplaces as leaders and just as part of creating great organizations. So Gena, welcome to Red Cape Revolution.
I am so excited to be here with you, Darcy. What I'm actually hoping for is that I can suck some of your energy, the thing that you're so famous for, and it will carry me through the day. I'm pretty sure that will happen.
Okay, well, I'm sending you my whatever energy I might have left.
Yes,
But
yeah.
it's always lovely to be able to talk to a friend who also has done such an incredible accomplishment. I know how long and hard you have worked on this book. So I wonder if you could just tell those of us who are watching and listening a little bit about where did this start for you? You talk a little bit about kind of some of the genesis of your story in deciding it was time to write Leading Inclusion. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and there are actually so many facets to that. So I hope you'll bear with me because the answer is not the simplest. I mean, I think the precipitating factors clearly are that in the spring of 2020, I almost had a nervous breakdown. It started sort of like at the beginning of the year when Ahmaud Arbery was killed in Georgia. And I saw some things on the news that were surreal. I could not believe them. And then in March, Breonna Taylor was killed. And truly, I thought this could have been my daughter. I do have a daughter. I mean, they don't look alike, but there was nothing different about their circumstances that would differentiate her from Breonna. And then in May, George Floyd was killed. And so here's the truth of the matter. Here's the fact of the matter. Those three events were like spotlighted in my life. They felt very personal. And at the same time, I was working and doing all the things that one does. And I started to get this feeling of I sort of say fake, fraud, and phony because I was going through life pretending like everything was okay. And I had learned how to do that for a very long time. That was my MO. But now I realize, you know what, Gena, you can't keep doing that. You are seeing this problem. You want to be a part of the solution. Maybe you're not going to, be an activist and march in the streets. But there has to be something you can do. So I said, what if I could take my lived experience in corporate America, along with my organizational psychology and executive coach experience working directly with the leaders, and measuring employee opinions and all the things that I know so much about. What if I could take all of that and package up some guidance for leaders to help them understand what employees who look like me or don't look like me are experiencing in corporations, but go beyond that to help them see what they could do to help make their overall organizations healthier. And so I just said, in the moment, somewhere in that time frame, you know what? This is, I think, how I can help. One of the things I think that helped me to do this and made it a little easier in some ways, frankly, is that I wasn't born in the United States. I came to the United States when I was 20 years old. And what does that have to do with anything? I don't know that I would react the way to things the way I do had I been dealing with some of these issues since I was born, right? Because I do recognize that there are people who say, well, my approach to thinking about these issues is inclusive and, you want everybody to get along and you want to bring people with you and support you, which I do. And some people say, well, enough of that, you need to be pushy. You need to do it a different way. And I don't do it this other way. And I think part of it is because, like I said, of my life experience, but also fundamentally because I don't think humans are that different. And I think the focus really needs to be on finding common ground, looking people in the eye, and doing the basic human connections. So while I talk about a lot of complicated concepts in the book, the one thing that is the core message in my book is that I am optimistic that if each of us could look each other in the eye, that we could figure out the solutions to almost everything, including this.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you make, because I think a lot of people, have wrestled with the different tensions that are in the public eye in race, in gender, and
Yeah.
all sorts of different points of difference. And yet, when we're friends with somebody, when there's someone who's our neighbor, who we're working with somebody that we don't have the same conflicts as much, although again, and certainly there are conflicts, but the using your organizational psychology background and your leadership training background of how do we get to the human issues behind that, creating inclusive workplaces, and not necessarily feel like, well, we have to have, like break everybody into each category. But you also talk about really understanding someone's lived experience. And I think that's, for me personally, so obviously anyone watching this, I'm a white woman, you're a Black woman, that there are different experiences that we grow up with, or perceptions or things. And so I know that you've been working with teams. You talk a little bit about the book too, of having difficult conversations to understand where people came from and where their perceptions are, in order to get to new agreements, new understandings, new types of change. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I said earlier that that I sort of think of myself as a fake, a fraud, and a phony, it relates to this question that you just asked. Here's what I mean by that. For most of the years, all of the years up until I wrote this book, that I have advised leaders and corporations and worked directly with a wide cross section of people, I haven't. Gena has not been part of that conversation, right? So we're trained as professionals, you keep yourself out of the conversation. So I'm very adept, and I have a very good poker face. I can talk about whatever I need to talk about. And one of the things that I learned, however, in those years, is that often executives did not understand the experiences of their employees on a day-to-day basis. I mean, any of their employees. So for example, we would do all these employee surveys that say once a year at the very least. And we would, collect tons of data from all the employees, but there would usually be some comment questions in those surveys. And executives never got to see those comments. In fact, executives mostly were never encouraged to look at those comments, because they were kind of treated as if they were secondary, of less importance. And yet I knew all the good stuff was in the comments, because you can average some scores for a group all day long, and you can say, did something go up 1 point or 2 points? But if you don't understand why the thing went at 1 point or went down 2 points, you're not really doing anything with it. So the comment data is the juicy part. And the comment data, in my opinion, is equivalent to conversations, human conversations. So leaders aren't necessarily getting that kind of insight. And the other thing that I also knew, and then that was reinforced in the research that I did, was that there is an emotional, the challenges that we have in organizations as a function of the ways that we vary are emotional barriers. They're emotional distances. We can wrap it up in whatever we want to wrap it up in, but the bottom line is we're just not connected enough to understand what the heck is going on here, so that then we can be effective partners with one another as individuals or in leading teams. So the difficult conversations come in where, I myself wasn't always saying everything that I probably could say that might have been helpful, for fear of alienating someone, offending someone. And if you replicate that 30 million times, you realize that that's how most of us go through life with most things, even with our children and our spouses and our partners and stuff. We don't always say everything we need to say. And we have usually good reasons. Mostly it's a self-protective thing. But the one thing I've learned with this kind of stuff is that it's really important somehow to get to the point where you can have a conversation, whether it's in a survey or preferably one-on-one. So I wrote a quick response to a LinkedIn post recently, and I said, here, you know what? I kind of have a script for this, for difficult conversations, including ones about race, ethnicity, LGBTQ plus status, whatever, how people vary. What if, when somebody's feelings are hurt, they're offended, something bad happens, they go to the person and say, I want to just share something with you. Of course, I'm assuming these are one-on-one conversations. I want to share something with you. And then you sort of say, you probably didn't realize it, but when you did this or said this or asked for this or didn't ask for this, this is how it made me feel. Or this is how it made my colleagues feel. And I know that because here's what my colleagues did. Oh, you probably didn't realize that when you said that, this would happen. So you kind of lay out sort of what it is, what's going on here. And then once you start a conversation that way, in a manner that lets the other person understand that you're trying to solve a problem with them, they'll usually listen to what you have to say. And after they listen, they'll say whatever they have to say. And the only job you have at that point is to then listen without judgment, to hear what they have to say. And what they say will be the solution. Because especially if it's a leader, you want to find some way to get to the solution. The reason I'm saying it this way is because I'm convinced that if we could just have more conversations where people sort of air their dirty laundry early on before it gets completely destroyed, in life and at work, life would be a whole lot easier. Difficult conversations are important.
Yes, I agree. And there's some really interesting connection there into some of the work that I've done. One of the chapters in my book is called Assume Positive Intent. And I think what I'll hear sometimes from people who might have felt that they were offended or that someone did something that they perceive was to hurt them or demean them or whatever, it's if we apply assume positive intent and then take the initiative to speak up with assuming that perhaps they were not aware that person didn't see how that was read. And I know I've had that happen in my own leadership career where thankfully, someone would point out something to me that was totally unintended, but that there was another team member that was, because of their lived experience, was taking it in a different direction. And that was, not my intent. And it gave me the chance to correct, as well as to apologize and change my behavior going forward. So, so these are really honest conversations that we have to be brave enough to have them. And
mind you now, in some ways, I will have to admit that what we're describing right here is like a nirvana, right? The reason it does not happen is that organizations and leaders may not have created the culture, the foundation that lets people feel comfortable speaking up in general, not just speaking up about this, speaking up about anything. So if you have dynamics with her in a manager-employee relationship, let's say where I'm the boss and you're the supplicant, I don't care what the issue is, I'm never going to raise it. I once worked for a company that was going through an acquisition, it was acquiring another company in the state of Michigan. And I walked by the mailroom one day and everybody was in the mailroom was laughing. And I knew everybody. I said, what's so funny? They said, oh, every day those folks in Michigan, they send like 40 FedEx packages down here. And we send like 40 FedEx packages up there. And we know that all they need to do is like consolidate them in Michigan, maybe a morning shipment and an afternoon shipment, consolidate them in Florida, a morning shipment and an afternoon shipment. We'll send 4 shipments. We wouldn't have to work as hard. The company would save money. But guess why we're laughing? Because our boss, we're not going to tell him anything because he never wants to hear anything we have to say. So we'll keep doing this. We'll keep laughing. The company will keep losing money because you know what that was? That's an example of people not feeling like their voices matter on anything. So that's why I say for all of this, I go back to, well, what is the environment that one has created? And this, of course, also applies in personal, relationships.
So Gena, so let's talk about culture a little bit because I often, when I'm talking to clients or talking to groups, that they'll place a lot of the blame of why we can't do this or why that won't work here on the culture. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, what are the things that we can do to shift the culture? I know you've had an experience in an organization of trying to build a culture that allows for the space and the grace for some of these kind of conversations. But tell us a little bit more about where culture comes in and how we can impact it.
Yeah, so my definition of culture is what it feels like to work here and what it feels like to do business with you. And culture, and from my perspective, is something that just seeps into your pores, as Maya Angelou would say. You recognize it immediately. So when I walk into the drugstore, The minute I walk across the threshold, or maybe even before, I can tell just by looking at the faces of the people who work there. I can even look at the physical layout of the store. When I go and ask a question and somebody, pretends like they don't see me because they don't want to work or whatever, I can pick up on all of that in 2 seconds as a customer. Similarly, as an employee, the feeling of working in an organization, what it feels like to work here, what are the rules and the norms, as we like to say in psychology, are they're evident to everybody, but they're usually unspoken. But they were created. There's something that creates that. I once, for example, so here's an example, because you're asking me what do you do to change it. I once worked in an organization where the CEO of the company had come from New York and was very fashionable and fancy, and literally would judge people on their physical appearance and all aspects of their physical appearance. So when you were going to have a meeting with that person, that you had to show up a certain way. Well, the other thing about that was that people would say, let's say that person's name was Darcy. You were either a friend of Darcy or you were not. You were an FOD. So from the very beginning, I kept hearing this acronym, FOD. What does that mean? People say, oh, you'll see. And then eventually, it didn't take long for me to figure out that one of the big characteristics of the culture was that you had to conform to this physical presentation. You had to behave a certain way, look a certain way, talk a certain way. And if you didn't, you're out. So the inner circle was very small. And that inner circle got all the goodies, all the attention, all the reinforcement, all of the accolades and so on. And everybody else was kind of casted aside. That was bad leadership. However, the point I'm making here is it's usually defined at the top of the organization, which is one of the reasons I target my book at the top of the organization, which is not to say that any individual can't make things better in their work group, in their 30-person, 5-person, 10-person group. Of course you can, because fundamentally what I'm saying is every individual in whatever group it is has got to feel like he or she is totally respected, that call it being, they're felt, they're seen, and they're valued, right? So if those three things aren't consistently felt by everybody in the organization, and only some people feel that way, that's something you've got to change. Okay, so let's say you can't change the top of the organization. We can't always change the top of the organization. I think any manager has got to figure out, sort of search their hearts to say, why am I here? What is my job? What is my job about? The job of a manager and a leader is really to help other people get something accomplished. It's not about you. It's about service to the team and the other individuals. So if you're thinking now about what you can do, I say, ask yourself this: what are the things that I'm doing right now that support a positive culture, a culture of respect? What are the things that I am not doing that I could start doing that could support that? And are there things that I am doing that I need to stop doing? It's always the keep, stop, start model that I'm sure, use in your work, because in the end, it comes down to individual behaviors every day.
Well, and I think right now, a lot of the people who follow our work at Red Cape Revolution, they are not just looking for good work, but they're looking to make an impact, right? They're looking to do, good work in a way that matters, that makes a difference. And I think by thinking about some of these kinds of concepts of how am I influencing the culture? Where might I be repeating habits that maybe I should take a look at? This is obviously where, having an outside coach, having a peer group, a mastermind, somebody to be able to challenge the way you're doing things, but even to be able to help try to start some of these conversations. Yes. I think that it's a great point, that even in your group, like, how are you making sure that you are not creating a culture that unintentionally isn't connecting more with people? And I do think that right now, people, I think this has always been human, right? Everybody wants to connect, to be seen and heard. And the question of how and finding time to do that. But I always think there's lots of things we're spending time on that probably aren't making as much of an impact as having one better, deeper conversation with an individual. So
absolutely. Yeah, the research that comes out from, I'll use one organization called Work Human. I love this organization and I study I follow their work. And they did some research that clearly showed in the summer of 2021, when many people were working from home who had not before. And when employees were basically asked to say, what is it that was really determining whether they were having a positive experience? You know what they said? Whether or not my manager was checking in with me. And by checking in with you, now what they were basically saying is that now that I'm working remotely, I need more of that. I need more of the check-ins. So if you weren't doing check-ins, you need to start. And if you were doing check-ins once, whatever, you might need to do it more often. And because they said when the person checked in with me just to say, how are you doing and what do you need from me? That was sufficient to let that employee feel like they were seen, heard, and valued. But also the manager was now getting the benefit of constant information and feedback. So they knew what was going on with their employees. So to your point, in the end, everything that I talk about goes back to the fundamentals, not to creating new systems and processes or a new kind of leadership. It always goes back to the fundamental ideas of keeping employees at the center.
Right. Yeah. And when we're talking about employees, we're talking about humans and
Yes.
people. And I think you had a quote in here. I thought I had it flagged, but it was just that, we're just in different packaging, right?
Yes.
We all have the basic needs, but we're just all in different packaging.
That's basically it. Yeah, we're all the same in different packaging. And again, I'm not naive. There are some larger social and systemic factors that are real. They are very real. But in my experience, as I make it a point to get to know people of all kinds. That is my personal value. That matters to me. And it is something I encourage other people to do. In fact, I said to some students last night, you know how sometimes you walk into a situation, you see somebody who doesn't look like you, or for whatever reason, they're different than you. And your brain tells you, go away, avoid, step back, stay away. That's what your brain tells you every time. So when you feel that awkwardness, you should now say to your brain, oh, shut up. I'm going to move forward by 2 steps. And of course, I was making a joke out of it, but I was really making a point that that's what we have to do, because it's an emotional thing that happens, right? And so you have to choose. Yeah. You have to choose.
Science wants to keep you safe, and it is old ingrained biology in many ways. And so this is another thing I know we have in common of, I talk about conquering the battle of the brain, and to be able to talk back to the brain and say, thank you for that outdated information. I'm actually going to go introduce myself to that person. Who feels different than me.
Yeah. And you have to work on it. It is, and don't beat yourself up. I said to the students last night, and I say to all my clients, the brain does play tricks on us, and we have got to get accustomed to challenging our brains and not assuming that they're right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, great. Well, Gena Cox, we could talk about this forever, but there's so much in this book, so much in this topic, but the book is called Leading Inclusion. I hope that people pick it up for themselves, for their leaders, their teams. One of the things that I really like about it too is it has very clear both executive summaries and action plans at the end of it, at the end of each chapter. So questions you can ask yourself, ask your team. So it not only has all of the research and theory that went into it, but also very practical and tangible for those of us who want to live in workplaces that work better for the people in it. So,
which is all of us.
Which is all of us. Yeah, hopefully that is all of us. Gena, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Go to my website, genacox.com, and it's Gena with an E, genacox.com, and you'll learn more about me. You can connect to me there. You can also, register to get some of my free goodies that I will be happy to share with you. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Great. We'll put those in the notes wherever you are watching this video or listening to it. So Gena, thank you so much. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
And I guess congratulations on just being a fresh voice in this world to, keep us moving forward and making sure we're connecting with each other in ways that work. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate you.
Darcy, thank you so much for having me today. It's really been a pleasure. And we're both authors. And so I look forward to finding ways for us to work together and to get help, get one another, get our ideas out into the world.